Radical left wing environmentalists are still wreaking havoc on our economy and undermining the rule of law in Canada. They must be stopped. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning into The Candice Malcolm Show. I'm really pleased today to be joined by my friend Aaron Gunn. Aaron is an independent journalist, a common sense pundit, and he recently ran for the leadership of the BC Liberals. We're going to get into all of the juicy details about that. Aaron Gunn is one of the few voices in British Columbia that advocates for common sense and for respect for the taxpayer. With over 50 million video views and thousands of followers, Gunn has become a steadfast opponent of cancel culture and identity politics. Gunn couldn't stand by while politicians appeased the woke mob and disrespected taxpayers. This is why Aaron Gunn decided to run for the leader of the BC Liberals on an explicitly conservative platform, but unfortunately, after gaining the support of thousands of members, he was unfairly barred from running for the upcoming leadership race by the BC Liberals Leadership Election Organizing Committee. It's a wild story. We're going to talk about all of it on the show today. But first, Aaron Gunn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Candice. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, you're a familiar face on the show. You've been on a number of times, and we were sort of talking to you in the midst of your platform, launching your campaign. It seemed to be a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement. And then you just sort of, the BC Liberals just sort of put a wall in front of you. So why don't you walk us through what happened there? And, is that it for your political career when they told you couldn't run, or do you still have plans, and what's up next for you?
Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, we're definitely just getting started. But what happened was we were in the race for about 2 weeks. We had signed up and garnered the support of thousands of British Columbians in a party, the BC Liberal Party, that was in pretty rough shape. And just to take a step back, this is a party that's supposed to be brands itself as a free market coalition of Liberals and Conservatives. And they asked for my help during the last election. One of the candidates asked for my endorsement, asked for me to campaign for him. And they asked me to run as a candidate for them. So we put our name forward. We tried to mobilize the social media following. I think that the people that control the party got scared that we were going to pull this off and win. And then out of nowhere, they basically came out and said that my views were somehow inconsistent with that of the party. They mentioned reconciliation and without providing any examples whatsoever, and basically nixed the candidacy right there. So a lot of people ask me, how can they do that? It's just an unelected 7-person committee. And of course, the irony and the hypocrisy of all this is that unelected committee, none of the people on it are Indigenous. And the one Indigenous person in the race, Alice Ross, has appeared in my videos and supported my entry into it. So I think it was just about a small group of people trying to hold on to the little enclave of political power that they've carved out for themselves. And they viewed me as a threat to that.
Well, rightfully so. I mean, you are a threat, and it's in the best kind of way, you're a threat, because you're an actual, you speak for the people, and your message really resonates, which is why you have such a big following online, Aaron. It's interesting because I hear a lot of people complain when elections roll around that they don't like any of the candidates. It's like, really, this is the best we can come up with, and it doesn't really feel like true democracy when you're kind of given a selection of like 3 or 4 very similar politicians, and it seems like the saga with them blocking you is exactly the problem, because they have the political parties hold so much power in our system, and it's a decision of a small, like you said, unelected group of people who are claiming to speak for an entire big tent party that's supposed to be Liberals and Conservatives. So what's next for you? I know you said that you're just getting started. I know that there were some rumors out there that you might be running an independent campaign or going over and joining the BC Conservatives, which is a very small party, but maybe with someone with your star power, you might lift the fortunes of that party. What are you going to seek out another party, or what are you going to do?
Well, first off, I have to agree with you 100% that the political parties in Canada wield way too much power. Obviously, in other countries and other systems, there's a lot more limits on that power, and that's a really unfortunate thing. Now, the solution to that, or the only solution to that, is to go and create new parties or breathe life into kind of small existing parties. So that's exactly what we're looking to do. At kind of our wrap-up event, we had a big event in Chilliwack. I promised that during the next, or by the time of the next provincial election, there will be a new common sense alternative that British Columbians can vote for without holding their nose. Now, whether that's a new party, whether that's the BC Conservatives, as we've been talking to people there, that still remains to be seen. And we're going to make sure we do our due diligence before we reveal all our cards. But the status quo in British Columbia, like much of the country, I might add, is just not in my opinion, not acceptable. And I think British Columbians and Canadians, generally speaking, deserve a lot better than the choices that they've been given recently.
It's interesting, Aaron, because one of the criticisms I've heard from the political left in British Columbia is that they're not happy with the NDP government because they think that the government is going too hard against these blockades and these protesters, and the left thinks that the premier should step in and cancel all these projects or block them all. I know that you, through your independent reporting, through your excellent political series, Politics Explained, you know this issue inside and out. So if for us, the rest of us watching and the rest of the country, it almost feels like deja vu. It's like, wait, protesters are up in Ferry Creek again, and okay, now they're blocking Coastal GasLink. Like, is this just going to happen again and again? So I'm wondering if you can help us understand. Let's start with the Ferry Creek ones, because those were the ones that were going on earlier this fall in September. And that's up on Vancouver Island. I believe you visited that site. Can you talk a little bit about what that project is and why the protesters are what the protesters are doing and what they hope to accomplish?
Yeah, well, the first thing I think I should just mention, you listed them off: Ferry Creek, Coastal GasLink, throw TMX in there as well. These kind of ongoing blockades and acts of breaking the law to try to make a political point that have continued through BC. The thing you have to understand, or that Canadians have to understand, is that this is an industry. This is a protest industry. So just like any industry, they have to keep money flowing in and they have to keep their activities going. So they will always find something to protest, regardless of the facts on the ground. With regard to Ferry Creek, that was just a run-of-the-mill cut block in British Columbia that a company called Teal Jones bid on and had the rights for the provincial government. And that activists clung to. It's about 2 hours outside of Victoria, and started protesting and started trying to paint as somehow the last old growth or ancient forest in British Columbia, which just isn't true. There are 10 million hectares, so billions of trees that are already protected in provincial parks and old growth management areas. And they were just cutting down a really small part, as is done throughout British Columbia. Forestry is our most important industry. And the amazing thing that just shows the hypocrisy of these activists, you're talking about an industry that is 100% sustainable and renewable. We have the highest environmental standards in the entire world, much like oil and gas and mining. And the other thing is that particular cut block up in Ferry Creek was 100% in partnership with local First Nations. And then now the NDP government, under the pressure from the activists, has deferred about a third of old growth logging in British Columbia, or so-called old growth logging. And who gets hurt by that the most? Not the big corporations who just take their money from British Columbia and go buy sawmills in the United States, but local First Nations and small forestry dependent communities that now have no local economy and have no more local jobs for people in those communities to go work. So it's a really damaging decision. But of course, even with the moves by the NDP government, these activists always want more and more and more, and honestly aren't going to rest until all of our industries are put out of work.
It's interesting because I hear the rumbling from the political left saying that they want the NDP government to do more, but you make an excellent point that it's like whenever the NDP is in power in British Columbia, the forestry industry suffers. I remember in the 90s, growing up in BC, and there were so many communities that were devastated by the closure of pulp and paper mills. A lot of young men were just moving to Alberta because there were no opportunities in British Columbia, and it seems like that might be happening again. Except for now, we're in an unfortunate position where those kind of jobs don't exist in Alberta in as large numbers. Let's shift gears then and talk about the Coastal GasLink, because that was the one that we saw multiple protests throughout November, including arrests. And that was the pipeline that David Suzuki said that it would be a shame if someone blew up this pipeline, basically alluding to domestic terrorism and giving it a pass. And you had the CBC defending it until David Suzuki finally came out, clarified, and apologized. So I understand that you visited this project as well. And it seems like a similar story that has the blessing of the First Nations communities. And then there's just a couple of really loud activists that are trying to disrupt it. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Coastal GasLink pipeline is the perfect example that shows just how shameless these protesters are. This is a pipeline that's exporting Canadian natural gas to Asia, which is the cleanest natural gas in the world. It's going to Asia to displace coal-fired plants. So it's good for particulate pollution. It's good for CO2 emissions, which is what the activists claim to be so concerned about. And it's also supported by all 20 elected First Nation bands along the pipeline route. So if you were looking for some kind of pipeline that you could put up on a pedestal as kind of the ideal pipeline, this would be it. And yet they're still protesting relentlessly against it. And it's actually shameful what they've done is they've gone into these communities. They've taken, again, these are not homogeneous communities, First Nations like anybody else. They've taken one or two First Nations people, they've put them up on a pedestal and then said that somehow the pipeline is violating their rights. Again, even though all 20 elected First Nation bands from Fort St. John all the way down to Kitimat, where the LNG export terminal is, have signed on and support the pipeline, including the Wet'suwet'en First Nation band. So it's disgraceful what's going on. I visited these protesters, and at the end of the day, when you visited them, and I had these conversations with them as part of my documentary series, it's clear that they don't have any idea what's going on. They don't know the details. A lot of them are professional protesters, or they're given kind of free room and board at these protest camps that have been erected, and then the protest groups use the free media, earned media off of that to raise money to continue to fund themselves and to shop themselves around to billion-dollar US foundations. So that was quite evident in what's happening, and the sad part is again, it's not so much the big corporations that are getting hurt. It's the small First Nation groups and small communities in northern BC that would have the most to gain from a project like this.
It's such a shame. I mean, the way that you explain it, so clear cut, and yet it seems to be this real difficult issue that our politicians don't really know how to solve. I wonder. I remember from your Politics Explained documentary series, you were confronted by some of these protesters. Was that Coastal Gas or was it somewhere else? Can you walk us through what happened there?
Well, I guess you could say I was confronted both at Ferry Creek, at Coastal GasLink pipeline up by Houston, and then also someone or a group of people called the Tiny House Warriors that were protesting the TMX pipeline. Now, the confrontation that happened at TMX was which is just north of Kamloops, was probably in a place called Blue River, was the most animated, to put it nicely. And it just goes to show that so many of these people are unhinged and they don't know the facts of what they're talking about. I mean, I was up at Ferry Creek talking about the forest industry. None of these people actually know what they're doing there. It's the same with Coastal GasLink, and it's the same with TMX. So, these protesters, I don't know what's going on in their own personal lives, but they're searching for some kind of philosophy that's greater than themselves, and they just latch on to it without actually knowing what they're talking about. But of course, the people running these movements know exactly what they're doing, and it is an industry. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. In fact, probably closer to a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Well, yeah, the point you just made reminds me of Jordan Peterson, the chapter in his book, get your own house in order before you go out and change the world. If only these people on the political left would bother trying to learn from what Dr. Peterson has to teach. So, Aaron, what can we do about these groups? Because the way that you're describing it, it seems like a group of people, just their goal is to upend the rule of law, to try to overrule the democratic will of the people, to have their way, like basically just stop our industry, which would have devastating effects, not just on the individual workers, but on the whole economy. Like, I don't know what they want if not oil and gas? Like, sure, you can have a dream of 100 years from now where we don't use fossil fuels, but that's not the reality today. And stopping Canadians from being able to produce this good that is in such demand. I mean, it's just frustrating to watch. So, I mean, you studied the issue carefully. You did these documentaries on it. What do you think needs to be done? What can Canada do to make it clear that, you know, we uphold the rule of law and we respect industry, and you know, we want to have a cleaner, safer environment, but you know, the way that they're going about it is not going to solve those things.
Yeah, I would say that the number one thing that this country is missing, that it could use a lot of right now, is well, there's maybe two things, but the first thing would be political courage. So I think politicians, regardless of political party, need to draw, you know, a line in the sand, a red line that says, if you want to protest peacefully on the side of the road, that is 100% your right. Will always be your charter protected right in Canada, or it should be. But that line's crossed when you start infringing on the rights of on everybody else, and we start trying to really take anti-democratic elections. I mean, a lot of these pipelines were issues in provincial and federal elections that yielded certain results. And by going out and breaking the law and obstructing people from going to work, like in the case of Coastal GasLink, or blocking highways in Victoria and Vancouver, you're really thumbing your nose at democracy and the democratic decisions that Canadians made. So I think that needs to be a red line in the sand, and it's time to actually get tough on these protesters. And I actually think also cracking down on groups who are knowingly financing illegal activity and financing the illegal discord in Canada. The second thing I would say is it comes down to people like myself and people like you, Candice, at True North, to continue to bring the truth to these issues, and for Canadians who want to hear the truth and know what's actually going on, to continue to support groups like this, because we do, I think, have a deficit in the mainstream media of good, solid reporting. So it's important to get the facts out there.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that second point. I want to ask you about that first point, though, because, well, there's two things. First of all, we saw the Trudeau government remarkably pass a law in this legislature. So you know, we had a shortened parliament. Trudeau waited until the very end of the year, basically, to have the House of Commons sitting in. One of the only pieces of law that he introduced was this law making it illegal for protesters to block hospitals, you know, gearing against the sort of anti-forced COVID vaccine crowd. People who, you know, in my estimation, are rightfully protesting, being fed up with a system of lockdowns and politicians who lie. But Trudeau went out of his way to put this heavy-handed law out there, where protesters, if they are blocking, and obviously no one should block hospitals, no one should harass hospital workers. That's uncalled for. But you know, the politics behind targeting these people, you know, it's noticeable that these are the people that he's trying to punish, while the other people, that all this stuff is happening in British Columbia, all this stuff is happening all the time. You know, they kind of turn a blind eye to it. So I wanted to get your take on Trudeau passing out a lot of block hospitals, and then also in Alberta, we saw the Kenney government you know, do this long report studying who were behind all of these sort of shadowy anti-Alberta oil and gas campaigns. And I mean, the report was super interesting, but I don't really know if it's going to lead to anything. So I wonder if you could comment on those two issues.
Yeah, well, first on Trudeau's law, I might mention that you might not be familiar with it, but BC actually introduced, I don't know exactly where this is, or shockingly, it hasn't been challenged yet, but they actually introduced it's like a bubble zone legislation. So you can't even protest on the sidewalk within a certain distance from hospitals. It's like a couple kilometers or something like that. And again, at the same time, we're basically allowing activists to shut down highways and arteries that in many cases are actually important for people actually trying to get to the hospital, among many other important things. So I think that, yeah, it shows a double standard, but I think it also shows, when it comes to the environmental groups, this isn't just an assortment of individual people who are fearing being arrested. This is an organized campaign. Up in Ferry Creek, they know exactly what they're doing. People sign up, who's prepared to be arrested. If you've been arrested before, okay, maybe you don't want to do it because the judge will be harder on you. They've got people waiting to to grant you bail, to pay all your legal fees. So it's an organized campaign of illegal protests. And I think that's the big difference. And that's why they've been more resilient. But again, it just comes down to political courage, where you need to have politicians who are willing to take them on and not to basically get pushed around, but by what really is like 1-2% of the population who thinks that extremist tactics can dictate their will to everybody else.
And then, what did you think about the study out of Alberta? Do you think did you look into it? Do you think that kind of initiative is helpful? Do you think it'll lead to anything? What's your take on that initiative?
Well, I think that it could lead to something as far as the potential of financing groups that are engaging in illegal activities. And maybe there's some law that, again, it would take political courage from the federal space. But beyond that, I think, look, these left-wing groups, we all know they're getting big dollar funding. They're getting US funding to wage these campaigns. And it's up to people that are proud of Canada, want to stand up for Canada, Canada's resource industries and independent media, to stand up against them, and for people to support those individuals, such as yourself at True North. As far as like having the information war, the misinformation war, or trying to combat these narratives, I mean, that is part of democracy. I think that, and the fact that we've been able to shed light on it, I think is a good thing. But I think the bigger thing actually is that conservatives, but particularly conservative politicians, need to step their game up and go after these groups and shine the light on what they really are. And I think Canadians are smart enough to make the appropriate decisions if politicians actually take the lead, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there would be a huge appetite for a politician who is willing to speak out against this chaos, this lawlessness. And you make a good point about how we protect hospital workers, as we should. But why don't we extend that same courtesy to the blue collar workers in northern British Columbia, northern Vancouver Island, who are just trying to go to work in the same way as doctors and nurses? There really is a double standard, and it speaks, I think, volumes about the sort of snobbiness of the legacy media and politicians who cheerlead the laws against protecting doctors and nurses, and then completely, like we said, turn a blind eye. Well, Aaron, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the Candice Malcolm Show. I hope you have a wonderful holiday and a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Candice. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you as well.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show.